Good morning, and welcome to another episode of Old Men in Chairs. And now for something completely different. I will not be reacting to a music video today. As you can see on your screen, I will be reacting to a television show that aired in November of 1967. The person on the right you should recognize as Johnny Carson, and no doubt you may recognize the person on the left as former President Richard M. Nixon. However, in 1967, Mr. Nixon was a private citizen and not yet declared that he was going to be a candidate for president, although he shortly after did. And he actually won the 1968 election. So within a year of this episode, he was elected president. He served a full term and then was re-elected in 1972, but only served a couple years and was forced to resign because of the Watergate scandal. It's 50 years ago this year that Nixon was re-elected and the Watergate affair began. And I suppose it's all ancient history to a lot of people. But I watched this the other night and I got a lot out of it. And to be honest, I was never a Nixon fan. I think I was brainwashed, like a lot of people were brainwashed, to see Nixon as an evil person. They were very successful in bringing him down, but he may have known some things that are still important today. So let's watch a little of this and see if you don't get something out of it.
And you can watch the meter on the monitor, should become the Republican, or will become the Republican, yes, will become the Republican candidate for president in 1968. Okay.
So that's a pretty strong indication that Mr. Nixon enjoyed broad public support before he was elected president. And I think it reflects on his basically middle class background, even lower middle class. His father owned a lemon farm in California when he was young, and that venture eventually failed, and then his father started a grocery store. And a young Richard Nixon worked very hard in all those ventures, and he used to drive into Los Angeles to the produce markets and pick up produce before school in the morning, bring it back to the shop, clean the produce, display the produce, and then he would go on to school. So he didn't grow up with any silver spoons in his mouth, and later became a practicing attorney. For what it's worth, he was popular across a broad swath of what we call middle America, the middle class America, what used to be the backbone of the Republican Party.
Well, I really don't even think we have to ask the negative there, because it seems to be overwhelming and it wouldn't prove anything. Does that...
You gave me only 10 tickets tonight, too.
Does that give you any indication? Is that what they call salting the mind a little bit?
I tried to get more, you know.
That's what they call salting the mind, I think.
But only 10.
I noticed a few people withholding their applause in all to get a fair decision here. Does that in any way indicate anything to you at all, even though we only have 270 people?
Well, that indicates that I'm very fortunate to be on this show tonight.
Can't get you nailed down. I'm working here. A lot of people, and you yourself said it, that you thought maybe one of the factors in losing the election, and it was been written up in the press, that you didn't come over well on television from a physical standpoint, and the famous makeup thing came up. Do you think that plays a major part now? I'm sure it does on television for all candidates. The impact.
It's an immensely important...
and I'm not sure whether it's really the right way, whether it is really a valid point.
So this is a reference to the famous 1960 televised debates when Nixon ran for president after being Eisenhower's vice president for 8 years against John F. Kennedy. And people who heard the debate on radio thought that Nixon had won. But people who watched the debate on television had the opposite view, because JFK was very telegenic, a very handsome man, as everyone knows. Nixon not so much, and he suffered that particular night from a bad makeup job that made his face look all pasty and not handsome at all. And in a very close election, Nixon just lost by a very small margin. A lot of people think, having a bad makeup man cost him the presidency the first time out.
Yes, I know that some of the political scientists look back over American history and they wonder if some of our presidents who were perhaps superior presidents could have won if they'd had to go on television.
Lincoln was one of the ones that was first suggested.
And although looking at Lincoln, I was just thinking that despite the fact that, as you know, he had a very high-pitched voice, and of course he was not a pretty man, but on the other hand, I would imagine he would do rather well on television. Don't you think? Don't you project with his strong features a mystique that some way comes through? Or do you have to really be handsome to come through on television? You would know, I'm sure.
No, I don't think that. I think it's...
Is it that?
I think it's a combination of everything. Yeah. Probably the intensity. People see strange things. They say that television does not lie. I'm not sure that I go along with that, because I...
Okay, if you've gotten this far, or if you've watched any of my previous videos, you probably realize I'm a political animal. I've been involved in politics. I've run for office a number of times. And the last time I ran for office, I ran against my cousin and a couple other people for town supervisor here in Geneseo. My friend Howard, actually, who was my partner here in these broadcasts, told me that there's no way I could win. And he explained the reason was that Will, my cousin, was much more handsome than I was. I don't think I'm a bad-looking guy, but I'm a little ragged around the edges. I don't clean up that well, or maybe I do, but maybe I don't put the effort into cleaning up. In any case, he was correct. I did not win, and my cousin Will did win. I'm not sure how much his handsomeness affected the result, but it probably didn't hurt. That's a sad truth of American politics, is that we have a lot of pretty boys. I'm not talking about my cousin now, but in Congress and upper levels, we have a lot of pretty boys who maybe don't have the character or the intelligence to do a good job in office, but they have the looks.
People see strange things. They say that television does not lie. I'm not sure that I go along with that, because I think you can appear in front of the public and present, if you want to, a different face than what you actually think or believe. You've had a few running battles with the press also. Do you find that the press often misquotes out of context what people say in your particular case?
Well, I understand there's some press here, so any other questions?
So you won't get misquoted on the answer.
No, actually, Johnny, whether it's press or television commentating, every political man, and I'm sure that you have the same problem sometimes when you're wondering about the notices and so forth that you receive in the reviews, is perhaps never satisfied with the press he gets. I think I tend, after having been out of government and out of politics actually for the last 4 or 5 years since my loss in California, I tend to become somewhat more tolerant at least at this point. But I do feel that it is vitally important not to infringe on the right of the press to take on a candidate, but also the right of the candidate, if he thinks he's put upon, to talk back, shall we say, honestly, without being belligerent about it.
The reference to his retirement, after losing the presidency in 1960, he was persuaded to run for governor of California against the incumbent Edmund Brown in 1962, and he lost that election as well. And many people thought, well, that's the end of Dick Nixon. In fact, he famously gave a press conference about his defeat and told the assembled press that this is my last news conference, and meaning that he was done with politics. Well, it was anything but. 6 years later, he was elected president of the United States. You can kind of see the charm of the man, which is a word that's almost never used about Richard Nixon. But in this pre-presidential interview here, he's very cagey. He knows exactly the message that he wants to get out and the message he doesn't want. Very, very adept politician. And there is something, he makes me smile. There's something warm and human about him, which I think most of us lost sight of once he became president, once he escalated the Vietnam War. We just saw him as, unmitigated evil. Helped on, of course, by a press that had always hated Dick Nixon for being the anti-communist that he was. And ever since he defeated Helen Douglas to become senator in California in the 1950, which was a very dirty, hard-fought battle, and where Mrs. Douglas gave him his nickname that he had forevermore of Tricky Dicky. Mrs. Douglas, who was married to the film star Melba Douglas, and was also an entertainer, an opera singer, and an actress herself, was the darling of a certain liberal establishment. And when this Quaker middle-class fellow anti-communist warrior from California beat her in that election, he basically was never forgiven. And ever since that time, the press was out for him, and they eventually got him. But now we're coming to the question that Johnny is about to ask, which I find the most important. I ran the other stuff just as introduction, but this is the heart of the matter.
Let me ask you one question. I suppose this would you could discuss it for hours. Do you think, and you've had dealings with Mr. Khrushchev, many famous dealings, and being very close to the top government office in our country, the time will come when we will ever find a peaceful coexistence with Russia or the communist nations? Are we going to have to learn to live with them, or are we going to have to learn to ignore them, or what? I know that's a big question.
Yes. It would be very easy to give on this Thanksgiving Eve the hope that everybody would like. That is, to say that the spirit of Hollybush now permeates the land. Let me be very direct and I think quite accurate in saying that we can have peace. Peace in the sense of the absence of war with the present Soviet government, and I think even with the present Chinese government. But we must understand that their goal in the world will be, as long as they are communists different from ours, their goal is not peace, it is victory. They want to expand communism without war if possible. Our goal in the world is peace. Now that means that in dealing with them diplomatically, we must always have in mind that they are attempting to expand their influence. We are attempting simply to avoid any conflict which would result in war. Now if we remember that, and if we maintain the strength, always remember that the reason we've avoided World War for the past 20 years is the overwhelming strength of the United States. And I would just suggest one thing, and all the talk these days about the fact that we can settle for nuclear parity with the Soviet Union. It's because we want peace that I say that never let the time come in a Cuban confrontation or in a Mideast confrontation when those who want peace, as we do not have superiority over those who want victory, as the communists do. If we remember that, we can have peace. That is the secret of peace. And then beyond that, communicate, discuss with them, negotiate, but always have in mind that this is not going to come by reason of simply having a meeting in which everybody speaks about their grandchildren and the like. It's going to come because of these very practical considerations.
I think that's pretty accurate. And as we look at the world today, and although Soviet Russia doesn't exist anymore, the current leadership of Russia hasn't changed much in wanting to expand their influence. We can just look at Ukraine and say, that's an example. They've annexed a number of former Soviet territories back into Russia, and without resistance they probably would continue to try to do that. But the bigger threat really in today's world is coming from communist China, and they've been much more successful at infiltrating into our highest levels of political power, and also into our academic centers, and even our entertainment industry is very much indebted to the Chinese market for survival. And they, more so I think even than the Russian, are interested in expanding their role in the world, extending their influence, not just in the United States, but all over the world. What they've been doing in Africa is a good example. They're after raw materials. Africa is where a lot of raw materials can be had, and so they've been very active over there, becoming involved with many African nations and working out deals so that they can get those resources. Beyond that, the Chinese, I think, and the Russians as well, have had a long-term plan to weaken the United States. They know that as long as the United States is strong, united, and powerful, and upholding the free world, that they will never be successful in extending their influence. So they've been running a cultural battle, supporting those in our country who, for whatever reason, are disaffected, who don't believe in the United States ideals, the Constitution, all of the freedoms enshrined in the Bill of Rights. There are people that in this country who think the Constitution was created by a bunch of racist white men, and therefore we should throw it out and have some other system of government. To a great extent, that opposition is being encouraged and even financed by foreign interests. I know that to say that sounds like a conspiracy theory, but anyone who actually looks into the reality of what's been happening in the last 50 years can only confirm that that's true. We'll listen to the audience reaction to what Mr. Nixon just said.
I think everyone kind of looks for that quick overnight panacea, and there's going to be a miraculous thing, and it's all going to happen, and as you say, it's not going to work quite that way.
Another thing, Johnny, we should have in mind, too, is that we should always separate the communist leaders from the people. The Russian people are a great people. I mean, not only great in terms of their achievements, scientific and all the rest, but also great in their capacity for friendship. I think we should have in mind, therefore, that looking at the Russian people and the Chinese people, and these are the two great powers that could threaten the peace of the world, that if the people actually prevail, there will be peace. But on the other hand, there are governments and there are leaders, men who have this passion for expanding their system. And all that we have to do is to let them know firmly, but non-belligerently, that if they are going to try to expand, that they are going to run up against the strength of the free world, because we believe that it's essential that there be peace in the world, and everybody should have a right to choose his own government, not have somebody else impose his type on him.
I'm going to stop the interview there. Those are the main points. You can talk about hedgehogs and foxes. The foxes are said to know many things, but the hedgehog knows only one thing, but he knows it very well. And perhaps President Nixon was a hedgehog on his anti-communism. Of course, he was a Cold War mentality. He volunteered and joined the Navy during World War II, and he was involved as vice president for 8 years in the 50s. So he had very strong anti-communist views. But Was he wrong?